Welcome back to Leap Into Business. And Lawrence, we're on episode 7 of our podcast here at the School of Business.
Wow.
And don't forget, our School of Business here at Lehman College is the only school of business at a public institution of higher education in the Bronx or Westchester.
Love it.
And Lawrence, today I'm super jacked to have our current guest for episode 7.
Yes.
Want to bring him in?
I want to bring him in, Calvin Harris Jr., New York CEO of New York State Accountants. Sean, this is really your space. This is like
This is the CPA show today.
This is a CPA show.
Lawrence, you can leave. Actually,
I thought about it. I thought about
We got
it.
it.
One of the great things too, and Calvin, this was Calvin's first time on Lehman campus, so I gave him kind of one of my short kind of tours. But we also had students show up for him.
That was great.
Who came and did a presentation because we're thinking about starting a new, resurrecting our NABA student club. So Calvin, thank you for not only giving us time for the podcast, but definitely giving us time for our students and their presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was great. And, thank you both for having me on campus. Yeah, it's my first time here and really excited to get around. Honestly, anytime I can see another campus in New York, I'm always going to say yes.
Good.
It's always just a matter of getting there. So, and fortunately, since I live in Westchester, it was really, just 20 minutes.
Good.
I mean, I don't know how often you can say that in the tri-state area that it took you 20 minutes to get there.
Yes.
But so thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And we're going to jump right into it. Calvin, talk to us a little bit about how did your education get you here? How does it get you here now? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a potentially long story, but I'll give the short version of it. So I actually knew that I wanted to be an accountant as a kid. And I've talked about this a few times in other places. My mother was a high school bookkeeping and typing teacher, which I'm not sure you have too many typing teachers anymore. But I was one of those kids who would read a textbook for fun. So after I took my first high school bookkeeping class, I kind of knew I was going to be in there. And truth be told, because of some of the because of the hours, which I know is a whole different conversation that one has to go through to become a CPA, I at least had the advantage of knowing early on that I wanted to do it. So I was an accounting major from the jump. When I started college at Morehouse in Georgia, I came out with an accounting major and I went into public accounting. So I knew very early on that.
Are you struggling at this point with the material, or is this your space? Like even in the struggle, I love this stuff. This is my stuff. How are you?
That's a fair question. I admittedly do love accounting. I'm a true believer in balancing the books and double entry. I still use a T account from time to time. I actually do enjoy accounting. Part of the allure of accounting, even as a child, was that I wanted to go in business. It's a really common thing for a person, for a kid to say, I want to go in business. I want to be in business for myself. And then just through my own little research as a teenager, I saw how accounting was and is the language of business, and how every organization needs accounting in some way, shape, or form. So I was really locked in that way. And I had great teachers, great instructors in college, and I learned a lot there. There were a lot of things I ended up learning, beyond college, but the education was key.
Right.
You can't really get around. We were just talking about that before we went live, that there are a lot of things a person has to do or should consider doing if they want to ultimately be successful in however they define success. But there really is no getting around knowing things. There's no getting around the knowledge. Even if you think about becoming a CPA, it doesn't matter how smart you are. There's no getting around passing that exam, and there's no passing that exam if you don't know the knowledge. There's just no way around that.
Absolutely.
So there has to be a fundamental baseline knowledge that you can't get around, and that's what education gets you for. And then everything from there, you grow from that base.
Right. Yeah. And did you see yourself? I mean, now you're CEO of New York State. Do you see this coming, or are you just the opportunities I got a great opportunity here, I'm going to seize that? And because I know part of good luck is being prepared. Right.
Spot on. I could not agree more. Even to your last point, whenever I get asked, okay, is it luck, success? I'm like, it's hard work. It's both. I mean,
Right.
I don't know anybody who has gotten to any point of achievement that didn't work their butt off to get there.
Right.
If it's going to be long lasting.
Right.
But I also don't know anybody who's gotten to a point of significance to where there wasn't some, whether you call it good luck, fortune, blessings, whatever you want to call
Right.
it. I always find there's a little bit of both, and some of it ends up just being timing. I am, I love New York. I've been here, going on 6 years, but I'm not from here.
Right.
It was a job, an accounting job,
Right.
CFO, Chief Financial Officer job that brought me here, and it was just good timing.
Right.
To where I was, interesting enough, I was a chief financial officer at a 2-year college in Baltimore, Maryland, and I felt like it was time for something new.
Right.
And it just turns out that life was in a place to where I could consider literally uprooting my entire life
Right.
and coming to New York 9 months before COVID. So it was
Timing's everything.
Timing is everything.
Timing's
But yeah, it ends up being always a bit of luck involved.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
And so, now, Calvin, I have to ask you, just as a CPA
Yeah.
to a head of
Yeah.
a CPA
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
how do current graduates who are majoring in accounting,
Yeah.
all part of that pipeline
Yeah.
conversation, which I'm sure you hear about all day, every day.
Every day.
But, what are the top skills outside of that baseline knowledge, right? Because everybody has to have the baseline knowledge
Yeah.
because I always say that the client or the managing partner isn't going to want to ask you every question and then have you Googling it or asking ChatGPT, right?
You need to know. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you had to list like 3 top skills that current students, current graduates really have to have in order to navigate and to thrive in this changing world, what are those?
That is a great question. I'm gonna limit myself to 3 because I think there are more than 3. But I'll limit myself to 3, and you could say maybe there's this or that. This goes with the assumption that you've got baseline knowledge.
Sure.
Right.
Because you honestly can't get around that. You just got to know your stuff. In a lot of cases, it's going to vary by industry. So you may need to be an expert in that industry. So let's just put knowledge as a thing.
The benchmark.
You got
Table
that.
stakes, yeah.
Table, right. So communication. And I'll combine them, even though it's maybe I shouldn't. Written and verbal communication. It never ceases to amaze me how just a person who can articulate things well will have the advantage over the person who can't.
Right.
And I'll even be a little more specific, and this is probably a little more verbal than written. A person who can take complex information and break it down in a way that is simplistic, you've got a huge advantage. And this really comes into play in accounting and business-related careers because a lot of times a transaction will be complicated. And sometimes you'll talk to someone who has deep knowledge like you, but sometimes you'll be talking about someone who has no knowledge whatsoever.
Right.
Can you break it down in a way that people understand? Oddly enough, and it seems counterintuitive, but a lot of times, the simpler you can explain something, the more intelligent you'll actually look.
Right.
People think, if I use these big words or something. No, actually, you sound like you're just trying to pull words from the dictionary. Your ability to say things really simply and concise will have a huge advantage. So the communication is key. Technology, you can't get around that. And I'll say it very broadly because technology is constantly changing. So the focus is making sure that you yourself are up to date and making the best use of technology. Here's a secret that more, let's say seasoned, because I'll say I'm seasoned. It's like how can I tell you how old I am without telling you how old I am? Right. I was born the same age NABA was founded. So look that up and you'll come to the number. So but when I started my career, we were doing things on paper. We were literally writing things down. I took the CPA exam on paper. But then by even just over the first 3 years of my career, we went from using that to carrying computers around to everyone working in a room. So the technology, so saying technology in each of my first few years of my career had a different meaning. Right. So, and it does now. So, of course, you need to be comfortable and familiar with AI. You need to be very comfortable in using those tools. Because then the funny thing is the people who you report to, at least initially, they probably won't know the tools. So part of your value is going to be doing things that people themselves can't do.
Yep. Right.
The third thing ends up being just being flexible. Some people are better than this than others, and some companies and firms are better than this than others. But I think we're at a time and a place where it's okay to challenge how some things should be done.
Right.
And sometimes you, of course, need to negotiate the realities of where you are. I'm not saying that if you're first year, you go into the managing partner's office and say, here's the way we should do it. I mean, that's bold.
Right.
It's bold, but it might not be very smart. Right. So, but that sort of flexibility in terms of how you approach, you always have the advantage because if there's one thing that CPAs, and I'm not just the CEO of the CPA, I'm a CPA myself. I'm licensed here in New York and in Maryland, and I've been a CPA for, over 25 years. So I actually know this area on a deep personal level. And we're not always the most exciting people.
What? Calvin.
I find that amazing.
How could you say that?
On camera, engineers too.
I didn't say we were. Did I? I said we're often perceived. Let me correct it.
Oh my God, the guy's yawning back there.
Is it too late to edit? So, no, I would say we're often perceived to not be interesting. Now, sometimes we're guilty of that, I will admit. But the person who can have that sort of flexibility, man, they have so many advantages.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just want to go back to technology a little bit because I talk about this often to our students is that, and here's what we share in common.
Yeah.
I was born in the same time NABA was found too, but
there we go.
We'll leave that alone. One of the things
Google it.
I know.
Now I have to Google it to know both of these things.
Found it here in New York, of course.
One of the things that's interesting is, to your point, me being in my career is watching how the landscape has changed.
Yeah.
Often tell students that when I was coming up, you had at least 2 weeks grace period for somebody to walk in, teach you the job and all that stuff. Yeah. Your new coworker is now technology.
Yeah.
It's not actually a person.
Absolutely.
It is technology. It is catching up on, the platforms that particular organization uses. They expect you to know those things.
Yep.
And so having those communication skills and being flexible adds value to when you have to deal with technology. So I think that's really important.
Yeah,
so
completely true. Completely agree.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting to me, Lawrence, that every single guest on the podcast, in terms of skills that graduates have to have, their top one is almost always written and oral communication. And that's super interesting, right? Because in the School of Business, obviously, we're focused on accounting, finance. We have comp science majors and minors and all the rest.
Yeah.
But AI is here, right?
It is.
ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, whatever you want to use.
Yeah.
How do people stay up to date, right? And how do they continuously update themselves on these tools that 18 months ago weren't here?
I mean, that's hard. It really is. And sometimes, technology can fool us into thinking we're even looking at the most recent information. So that you got to have, I'll say you really have to not let go of the constant learner sort of mindset. Now, the good thing about being a CPA, you'll probably hear me say this phrase a amount of times. It's not just because it's my job, but that helps.
As often as you want.
Right. The good thing, in fact, I'll say great. The great thing about being a CPA is that we have, by definition, constant learning we're supposed to do. Whether it's, averaged out 40 hours a calendar year, we should be doing to stay current. Now, if we're taking that learning the way we should, we're not taking it as check the box. So I'm just going to do these classes that I already know I'm going to get my grade and keep moving.
No one does that, Calvin.
No one does.
No one does.
Heaven forbid.
Nobody.
Heaven forbid. But if you're really taking advantage of what continuing education should do, you're gonna intentionally do things you don't know, whether you get credit or not. Just today. Not to toot my own home, but I guess I am, is, I did a LinkedIn learning class on AI. I was like, I don't quite understand it. Let me just watch this. So I learned some things that I didn't know from it. So I think part of staying relevant is that you have to keep you have to want to learn. You have to keep learning. Now, from my standpoint, a lot of times I want to learn because I think it helps me better at this job. If I know what's coming, if I can see what's coming, and if I can't see what's coming if I don't already know where we are. So you have to be really intentional on trying to stay current.
Right. No, I love that. And I think my next question is even personal to me a little bit, because as I talk to students, and I'm not an accounting major, that's not my space. Yeah. But when I'm talking to accounting majors, and oftentimes they feel like they're up against a wall. And they go, okay, I don't want to detour from this. I think I like it. Yeah. I don't really want to detour. What other doors does it open up for me? And I talk about nonprofits, education. There's all kinds of different avenues with an accounting degree that you can go into. Yeah. But I think oftentimes they feel like they're pigeonholed into this. Talk to me about, like, there's so many other things. And I think when you have communication and you have those skills that you bring to the table, accounting is just like that cape that you're putting on because you have all these other skills. Talk to me about other
I want to hold on to that cape analogy because I'm going to probably steal that. But you know what? But I think you touch on a real point, and it's a big one, and it is so difficult for anyone. Maybe this isn't just human nature. It's hard to think long term. The odds are the average student coming on board. And let's just give a stereotypical number. You're in your early 20s. Odds are you've got another third. Right. Well, other things to consider, of course. You've got 30 or 40 years out there. The time of a person working for one organization for their entire lifetime, their entire career, is so unusual. So I'm not saying you should go in there with the mindset of I'm only going to be here for a little while. Right. But it's worth remembering that you probably won't be here forever. Right. And the funny thing is, even if you love where you are and you're doing great at that work, other people will see you and probably try to take you away from there. That I've been fortunate where that's happened to me before. So you want to think about your career as your career.
As your career.
And
I like that.
It should absolutely involve the organization of the firm you're working with. I'm not saying that you should not care what you work. You should deeply care. And I think when you're working at that organization, you should be very passionate with it and very and have certainly loyalty to the organization. But you also have a duty of loyalty to yourself and to your own career. Right. And sometimes the only way to know if a place is a good fit is to try it, which can feel really scary. We're talking about a place that's going to be paying you money. I'm just going to try it, but sometimes you won't really know. For myself, I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., in suburban Maryland. Went to school in Georgia, and I decided to come back up to Maryland. I did not want to work in the D.C. area because I was convinced if I worked in that area, I would work in government. Federal government, government or nonprofit. I was like, I don't want that because what I heard in school was that I want to work at this, publicly traded. I want that. So I said, okay, I'll go to Baltimore. Baltimore is very close to D.C. I'm close to family. I'm close to home or my original home, but I won't be there. Now, little did I know that the firm I joined, Arthur Anderson, they had that very year got the audit of the state of Maryland and a number of nonprofits. As it turns out,
that was it.
You were supposed to do it. Good for me, though, because I'm lucky because as it turned out, I have a passion for nonprofit NGOs. I've worked at quite a few, which is something that my then college counselors would have hated. How many jobs I've had, so but they were all in that space. It turned out that was the space I wanted. The space I try to avoid is exactly where I belonged, and sometimes you just don't know until you try it.
You try it. Yeah, I love that.
And so, kind of building on that, right? Yeah. For our current students who are working through internship offers, doing internships, doing stuff after graduation, or to your point, sort of trying out jobs, be it in the corporate sector, nonprofit roles. There are all kinds of opportunities out there. Yeah. How would you sort of frame it for them, right? Because obviously, being here on the podcast, it's always easy to say to be intentional with your career, right? Here now. Yeah, sure. But then, like in the moment, as a 22-year-old, how do you convince them that doing that is okay, even as their peers are 23 years old, getting those hot shot corporate jobs? Yeah. How do you say that's fine, but there's also a alternate path that's going to put you pretty much where you want to be anyway?
This is a tough one. Yeah. And look, when I came out of college, I had an offer from from Arthur Anderson, big accounting firm, former international. When there was a Big Six, they were number 6. When there were 5, they were number 5. So they were there. But I also had an offer from 2 corporations, as it turned out, 2 chemical companies. And I had a hard time deciding, but I was strongly advised that the best way to start my career was in public accounting. So those other two offers, which were great offers, great opportunities, I passed on. Now, I don't have any regret for it. I think it was the right thing. It turned out pretty well in the end, But even back then, there was a lot of pressure. Here's how you should start your career. Yep. What I would tell a student is that you get to decide how you should start your career. There's nothing wrong with starting your career outside of the, quote, traditional path.
Right.
If you really feel connected to this organization, then that's probably where you belong. Right. If you feel connected to public accounting, great, that's where you start. But you don't have to start, even though I myself followed the most stereotypical path, you don't have to do that. You should do what feels good for you. And sometimes you won't know. I'll admit that approach might lead to mistakes. There were places where I went, I was like, oh, wow, I messed up.
Yeah.
But you don't really know until you try.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think that's a great point. So. We talked about this earlier when the podcast started about the students that you met trying to start this and their presentation to you. One of the things that we are, top of our agenda at the business school is partnering with industry, being more part of community, and then all those things are in first place. And then I add the third thing is mentorship. Sure. Like we understand, or we just believe that is going to give our students a competitive advantage. Coming from where that we come from, some of the things that we don't have a lot of leverage in, but there's one thing that we can do. It's not a big ask from industries to say, hey, mentorship. Talk to me about your personal relationship with maybe a mentor, and then how important that was. And you talked about some of the decisions you make. Do you go back, talk to your mentor, and say, hey, I think that share a little bit with us about that?
This by itself is a whole
episode,
honestly.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Because to this date, there is no point in my career or even life as an adult to where there weren't, and I'll add a little add-on, mentors and coaches in my life, including now. I'm CEO of the oldest state CPA society out there, because it all began in New York. I have a coach. I still have an executive coach. I still have people I consider mentors that I communicate with, because there's never really a point. This goes back to constant learning, continuous learning. There's never a point where you don't need that.
Right.
So mentors in some cases will be the official ones. Sometimes they'll be people you kind of just connect with. But I don't know anyone who's been successful in any part of life. I mean, let's go way beyond accounting.
Right.
You think about, I enjoy sports, so I loved the Olympics that happened in Paris recently. Every single high-powered athlete, we had a few people who were called GOATs, who I believe. Simone Biles has a coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still telling her and helping her out. He can't do any of the things she does, but she still has a coach.
Absolutely.
So there's never really a point where you can't find value in that person. Sometimes it's helping them point out things that you just won't see.
Right.
One of the things, and it's just one of the things of life, a lot of times it's hard to see what is so obvious to someone from the outside.
Yeah.
It's a blind spot. We all have them. And those mentors and coaches can help get you there.
Absolutely.
To date, I remain a mentor for a number of people, some officially, some unofficially. And, quiet as it's kept, any person who does mentoring tends to get as much out of it as they do. I've learned a lot from people that were supposedly my mentee. I was like, I didn't even know how to do that. You told me, So it's a beneficial thing, and ideally something you never really let go of. You always want to have someone as a mentor and a coach.
Yeah, I recently teach this class before students come in. It's like an orientation, and we're talking about mentorship. And I shared the story that your mentor should be moving you to a point where you kind of see eye to eye. It's like a bi-directional thing. It should not be this thing where everything I say you do. I talked about some of my own mentors, and me and my mentor 2 weeks ago having this huge argument. Like, I totally disagree with what you're saying, and how when I go back 10 years, how we started and how much space we gave each other to have that thing. And I think sometimes it's good for students to know that you move. Right, and you talked about mentors and coaching and all, and be open to if you can't really talk to your mentor and go, I disagree with that. I want a little more. Then it's not as healthy as you think it is. How do you
That's
feel
such a
about
good
that?
point. I completely agree. Now, maybe early on, particularly, earlier in my career, mentoring, I was just listening.
Yeah, just listen. Absolutely.
I'm just soaking in and trying to learn.
But you get to a point, right?
But that you absolutely should get to a point. You should expect to get to a point. And if you don't, you might not have the right person. Because the mentor also has to be willing to give
up. Right,
To
exactly.
say, okay, you know what? You're at a different place. I'm going to treat you as a peer. I still may be mentoring you, but we actually are at the same place.
Absolutely.
So it absolutely should grow over time. It takes both. It takes both parties for that to happen, but that absolutely should happen.
Right. No, it's good stuff.
And so, right, our conversation today has been quite broad, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the awesome things of being CPAs.
Yeah, it is awesome.
It is awesome, by the way, definitely. And
these guys.
There are all of these new areas, right, coming out. Be it AI, blockchain, crypto assets, ESG, cannabis work.
Yeah. Wow.
What advice do you have for students who probably don't all want to do audits or tax engagements or do ERP installations, right?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for students trying to sort of figure out how to hop on some of these new areas or new niches?
Yeah, and of course, kudos to you for all the writings that you do in those spaces.
Absolutely.
I've certainly seen a lot of. You're literally one of the people I look to get better information on those areas. Part of the reason I smiled when you even asked it because every single area you mentioned did not exist in a meaningful way.
Yep.
Just. I'll say 20 years ago, but in most cases you can say 10 years ago. So we're not even talking a long time to where, the first time I heard ESG, I was like, what the heck are we talking about? Then they explained, okay, this actually isn't new, but it's now packaged differently versus, the digital assets, cannabis, what have you. So the thing in terms of getting those areas, in a lot of cases, you'll have to think about a non-traditional path to get there. Now, I would say another great thing about being a CPA, we'll say this many times.
I'm getting killed.
Is that we are uniquely positioned to be experts in all of those areas. With every area you mentioned, the moment you mentioned them, I thought of a half a dozen firms, some big, some not so big, that are considered experts in those spaces in New York alone.
Right.
Because the great thing is when those areas are so new, your path to being a leader can be a little shorter. In the cannabis spaces in particular, the leaders in that area are all extraordinarily young and early, let's say early in their career. And that's not to say that they're not qualified. They're immensely qualified.
Right.
Because this is a place where I think where students and younger professionals actually have an advantage because you're not burdened with the stuff
with the history, with all
that a person like me have. I was like, well, you can't. You'll talk to an older person. Hopefully, I don't do this very often. It's you can't do it this way. I said, well, it's already happening this way. So let's get there. So. I would say for people thinking about being in those areas, you're going to have to think about non-traditional because they're non-traditional paths. You're going to have a non-traditional approach. As I mentioned, one of the great things about being a CPA is that in many of the firms, particularly in a place like New York, they've got practice areas there. Right. So if you want to go deep in ESG, you can go to this firm or that firm, and you can do that work. Right. You want to be in the digital asset space, that sort of work. You'll see a lot of members, at least members with NYCPA, who have those areas as focus. So it might be even through connections with organizations like mine, where we have communities that are focusing on those areas. But you have to have a traditional path. You have to think about it in a non-traditional way, because those pathways are getting created as we speak.
Right. And Calvin Harris actually gave a presentation at the first annual Digital Asset Conference.
I did.
Here at Lehman College, and hopefully I'll be able to get you back for the upcoming one in October.
I'm in.
No pressure, even though it's here on the record. No.
Yeah, I will say it's interesting because I keep getting I've told people I'm not sure I'm an expert in this space, but I love talking about it. I'm actually speaking in October, so I have to make sure our calendars work. I'm speaking at an AI focused conference on there because I say, okay, we're looking to do things in New York that are really leaning onto it because, selfishly, and it's not just because I'm here, but there is a uniqueness to New York, to where there are things both traditional, iconic, and always happening. So in those spaces, I'm trying to make sure that we're in a position to lead. So, count me in.
Excellent. And it's also a great sort of reinforcement of your point earlier that it's okay to sort of I'll say not dabble, but to try to find the areas that you like.
Absolutely.
Because here in the city, there's pretty much every opportunity, every practice area that you could want to ever work in.
Absolutely. It's all here.
Yeah, I love it. Calvin, talk to us a little bit about what's your North Star? Now you're here, right? We know success is a crooked line. Nothing is not a straight path. Yeah. What's your North Star now as your career, what are you looking at?
Yeah, well, I'll admit these days the personal and the professional are pretty much in line, and ideally they're always in line. Mm-hmm. So I'm in a role that I feel very fortunate to have, not because I'm not qualified.
Well, we know that you and Sean are very qualified.
Yeah, I've put the years in.
Right, that's a great thing
because I'm a CPA. Because I'm a CPA.
I'm done.
But I'll say one of the things that I love about being in this role is that it feels like, to borrow from higher education, it feels like a capstone of my career.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Rarely does a day go by that I don't end up talking about some strange story I experienced as a CPA early in my career. My favorite one ends up being the counting of frozen chickens on New Year's Eve in 1994. Right. Real story. Which I'll save for later. We'll save that for later.
Have you back.
I don't know why, but I feel like we want like a little tiny teaser on that story with the chickens.
The quick teaser is that this is at a time before I did something that technology would never think of doing it this way.
Okay.
Back in the olden days.
Of 1994.
Which would be of 1994. If you would do an inventory, and you would have to have people do the inventory. There's certain things you would just have to physically do. And if you have a fiscal year that ends on December 31st, you would do that inventory on December 31st. Right. So I ended up in a counting and standing on frozen pallets of chicken to make sure that inside the pallet there was real chicken.
Real chicken.
Had to be real chicken. For all I knew, inside the pallet, it could have been air, could have been tires, could have been some bodies.
Right.
Oh, there were no bodies. There were chickens. Though.
Right, but you had to count all of them.
I had to count the chickens. Yeah, I counted the chickens.
And you guys are good CPA.
Imagine if I was a bad CPA.
Yeah.
But my North Star really is all about. I do worry, and this goes into even one of the other things. I worry about the relevancy of the accounting profession. To be clear, I think accounting is as relevant now as it ever was. I think in many ways it's actually more relevant because technology, like we talked about earlier, allows us to do so many things that I'd even dream of doing. So I think part of the reason it's such an exciting time, knowing what I know now, I would be wildly excited to be joining the accounting profession because I can do all these areas that were never even options for me before. Right. So for me, the North Star is on relevancy of the profession, speaking the good words of the profession. I end up being one of those people who's fortunate to be in a job that is personally connected with me, which, by the way, I think is one of the critical things in any role you have that you need to, no matter how well you're paid, if you don't feel a connection to the work, it's going to fall off the rails at some point. So my North Star is, trying to promote the profession.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
It's excellent stuff.
Because it's a great time to be a CPA.
Yes, it is.
So Sean tells me that all the time.
Every day I tell him that.
He tells me that every time.
And so, to pivot, and I think I know the answer to this.
Okay.
But what's one thing that you're passionate about?
Yeah.
Outside of work,
although
being a CPA is great.
Man.
Outside of that, what's one hobby or activity that you're interested in that could surprise people?
Yeah. I'm not sure how surprising it is anymore because I post about it so much, but running is absolutely on the list. I am training for the New York City Marathon.
Okay.
It'll be my third time.
Oh, okay.
I am proof that you do not have to be fast to be a runner. I start the race in the daytime. I end it at night.
I'm not sure what place that is. That puts you in close to. Is that the middle of the pack?
I'll say I'm toward.
He finishes it though.
I finished.
No.
Oh no. I'm toward the end of the path. I'm not at the very end, but I'm
right.
If I have a great year this year,
right,
I'll finish when it's daytime. So I finish right.
Is that a goal? Is that
that's
your
my
goal?
Okay.
It's
just I don't even have a time goal.
Right.
I just want to see daytime. I want the sun in my eyes as opposed to the moon.
Okay.
So if I get that, it's a victory. Cool. But I do love running. Funny enough, I did not start running at all until I came to New York.
Wow.
Because and I blame COVID. Because when COVID happened, we were locked in. If we were fortunate, we had jobs to where we could just work from home and shelter in place, and I did. But I would get cabin fever. And my I had doctors, and doctors like, well, you can exercise outside. I was like, all right, well, I'll do that. Right. And I started running, and I decided to do like a half marathon for fun.
Right.
A half marathon for fun.
Yeah.
Which sounds crazy now that it came out.
I was going to say, yeah.
But I did a half marathon for fun, and then I was hooked. And then the year before, I had seen a friend of mine, run the New York City Marathon, and I saw people cheering. I was like, this is the greatest thing. And I will say, running is admittedly a passion. Rarely does a week go by. I ran 5 yesterday. I'll do maybe 6 tomorrow.
Wow, he's showing off.
And
I feel bad.
I ran to the refrigerator. He's running.
He's
killing me.
One of the great things about running, though, it ends up being almost meditative.
I've heard
because I get to kind of focus on me, and it always. I'm amazed at how many.
Are you a music guy when you're running too? Like, are you?
Usually, I have music in my ears. Sometimes, like yesterday, I just listened to a podcast.
Right.
Sometimes I turn everything off and just kind of listen to myself. I'm surprised at how many ideas. I think they're good ideas because we've implemented a few of them.
Right.
That'll just pop up while you're running.
Yeah.
But admittedly, I find that running ends up being, and this is the sort of craziness that a runner would say. So I realize how this sounds, y'all. That running is often a good metaphor for life, particularly if you're talking about a marathon. You'll start out. And if you have any sense, when you start mile 1 on the Verrazano, that's actually the steepest part of the race, is that first mile.
Okay.
It is awful. Right. But you're full of energy, and the crowd, and you're running, and you finish it up. But that's actually tough about. Now, you could be crazy and say, I'm going to run as fast as I can for that first mile.
Right.
Those next 25.2,
right, you're done.
Brutal.
You're gonna flame out.
Yeah.
But it ends up being really great perspective.
Right.
To kind of just churn along. So running is a passion. Running is a passion.
I love that. Here's our last question that we ask all our guests.
Yeah.
There are 3 metaphorical bones in business. There's your backbone, which is your decision making. There's your wishbone, which is luck or serendipity we talked about. Yeah. And then there's your funny bone, which is your sense of humor. Which one, and we know that you use all of these bones, right? Which one of these business bones do you find is your strongest and why?
This is a fantastic
question. I know.
And
it's
funny
came up with it.
Lawrence came up with it.
I got to say that.
Every podcast, he always takes credit for it. Yes, Lawrence.
Well, I see your name on it, but I don't know if you actually did it. I just knew you were going to ask it. But and I got to say, this is one of those where, in this world, you get to have interviews all the time, and every once in a while you get a question you don't know. So this is me kind of,
perplexed a little bit.
Well, early in my career, there's no doubt it was the, let's say, decision making, or I'll say knowledge,
right?
Because that's where you start,
right?
Then, particularly after a few things that happened, good and not so good, I realized that the luck played a huge part. And then in terms of just figuring out who I am and what connects with me, I realized the funny came out. Right. At least I think it's funny. People laugh, and who knows if they really should. But, the thing is, all 3, you got to have all 3.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think it's going to differ from time to time.
Anyone you feel really comfortable with, Calvin, like, this is the one, my go-to. Is anything you really feel like? What has been the through line?
It probably ends up being the first one for the job
your backbone,
specifically.
Your decision making, right?
Because so much just feeds into it. In terms of just the dealing with life, you got to have a sense of humor because certain things usually happen are going to be a little crazy. Yeah. But you got to really lean into that decision making and thinking because it requires you to think both short and long term. You have to think about the implications here and there. And then the other piece is, hope will turn out.
Yeah.
I don't worry about luck or serendipity. It's either going to happen or not going to happen. I can't. I love those people who believe that they're lucky and they're going to win the lottery. Good for them.
Right.
But I know the odds are it won't happen.
Right.
And
I'm going to stop playing.
Yeah.
When you sit with two CPAs, they'll give you.
By the end of the afternoon, it's like,
don't do that. Don't do that. It's not.
Yeah. So I'll say it's the decision making,
Right.
probably more than any other. But you're going to use all three.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah.
And Calvin, it has been an absolute blast having you on the podcast.
Yeah,
Thank you both.
We have to have you back on the campus more often.
Let me know.
Yeah,
absolutely. Let's figure out his schedule in October.
Yes.
And then if he can come by and do the Digital Asset Conference, that would be great.
That'd be great.
Sounds good.
All right, Calvin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
man.
you both.
Absolute
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks to the guys behind the camera. We appreciate you guys.
As always, making us look good.
Yes. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, guys.